At 10:07 on June 19, 1944, a radar officer stationed in the dimly lit Combat Information Center aboard USS Lexington monitored green phosphorescent blips moving across his screen, located about 130 miles west of his position. The radar indicated that 69 Japanese aircraft were heading directly towards Task Force 58. Over the following 12 minutes, fighter directors throughout the task force would need to coordinate the interception of these enemy planes using numerous Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighters dispersed across 3 different altitudes and separated by vast stretches of the Philippine Sea. The Americans possessed a technological advantage that the Japanese were unaware of, a radar system so advanced that it would revolutionize naval warfare in just 17 minutes. On that morning, Vice Admiral Hisaburo Ozawa's first wave consisted of 69 aircraft, including Mitsubishi 8673 fighters, Yokosuka D4 dive bombers, and Nakajima B-60N torpedo planes. The Japanese plan was straightforward: fly to the American carriers, attack from a high altitude, and sink as many as possible. With only 5 out of their 15 carriers needed to be destroyed for Japan to gain an advantage in the Pacific, they aimed to inflict significant damage on the U.S. fleet. The Japanese pilots expected to face tough American aircraft and skilled pilots, but anticipated seeing U.S. fighters before engaging them. However, at that precise moment, every maneuver made by the Japanese formation was being tracked by an SK-2 air search radar aboard USS Alabama, detected from a distance of 150 miles, plotted on transparent, vertical boards in multiple combat information centers across the task force, and analyzed by teams of radar operators, plotters, and fighter directors. These personnel were preparing to guide American fighters into position for interception well before the Japanese aircraft reached the carriers. Earlier that morning, as 07:45, a moment of bravery had given the Japanese fleet a brief respite. As Taiho was launching its second wave, USS Albacore fired 6 torpedoes towards the carrier. Sakio Kamatsu, a strike pilot who had just taken off in his Yokosuka D4 dive bomber, saw one torpedo heading toward his ship and deliberately steered his aircraft into its path, causing it to detonate upon impact. Kamatsu perished immediately upon making his sacrifice, which managed to destroy 1 torpedo but left 5 others headed for Taiho. Out of those, 4 missed their mark, while the 6th struck the carrier's starboard side, causing a breach in aviation fuel tanks and jamming the forward elevator. Despite initial appearances suggesting minimal damage, ruptured fuel lines were flooding the ship with flammable vapors, turning it into a floating bomb ready to explode at any moment. While Kamatsu's bravery delayed the disaster for several hours, it did not prevent it entirely. The first significant trial of American radar-directed fighter defense took place on June 11, 1944. Task Force 58 launched an extensive airstrike against Saipan, deploying 208 fighters and 8 torpedo bombers to assault Japanese positions across the island. American pilots reported claiming 86 enemy planes in the sky and another 33 destroyed on the ground. The Japanese pilots attempting to intercept the attack found themselves confronted by well-positioned American Hellcats at predetermined altitudes and headings, a result not of chance but of radar detection and precise coordination from combat information centers aboard multiple carriers. Even when the Japanese command suspected these encounters were orchestrated, they underestimated the extent of the Americans' capabilities. On June 15, 4 days later, as dusk fell, Japanese forces initiated a probe against Task Force 58 from Guam. 7 torpedo aircraft participated in this assault. American radar picked up their approach at a distance of 80 miles, but fighter directors decided not to send out Hellcats to intercept them. 5 out of the 7 Japanese aircraft were shot down before they could reach the carriers, while the 6th turned back. The 7th managed to escape without making any hits on American vessels. The surviving Japanese pilots reported that the American Combat Air Patrol seemed to anticipate their exact location and altitude. This was puzzling for Japanese intelligence, since reconnaissance had indicated no American fighters in the interception zone. It appeared as if the Hellcats suddenly materialized, precisely where they were needed. The Japanese did not grasp that they were up against a coordinated system rather than isolated pilots. By mid-June 1944, the Combat Information Center had become the command hub for American carrier operations. This concept developed from lessons learned during the Battle of Midway in 1942, when American carriers faced significant challenges due to the limitations of radar and chaotic communication between ships. Fighter direction was largely guesswork based on visual sightings, leading to poor positioning that resulted in carrier losses. Following the battle at Midway, it became clear that a better system was necessary. Admiral Chester Nimitz's staff reviewed the situation and studied British experiences with radar, directed fighter control, as well as analyzed the failures of radio communication. New protocols were created and implemented. In November 1942, Tactical Bulletin 4TB42 was issued by the Pacific Fleet outlining standardized fighter direction procedures. Admiral Ernest King officially renamed the Coordination Center as a Combat Information Center in January 1943. By early 1944, every newly constructed carrier included dedicated CIC spaces with trained personnel. The system relied on comprehensive integration. Ships equipped with SCATI-2 air search radars could detect incoming raids up to 150 miles away. These radar signals were displayed on circular scopes featuring rotating sweep lines. Operators would call out the range and bearing of detected targets, which were then plotted by enlisted plotters on large, transparent vertical plotting boards using grease pencils. Different colors distinguished various types of raids, with each group assigned a unique number. The plots provided a clear picture, displaying enemy aircraft, friendly fighters, surface ships, and more, all visible to everyone in the CIC. The fighter direction officer stood behind the plotters, overseeing the tactical situation as it unfolded in real time. The FDO maintained radio communication with every Hellcat in the air via VHF radios, offering clear and reliable connections across multiple frequencies to avoid interference. He could track the fighter's movements on the plot display. He was able to spot the incoming raid and could determine intercept trajectories, altitudes, and timing. Next, he would grab the radio microphone and direct the fighters into position. Turn left to heading Teuton 70, ascend to Angels 18. Enemy aircraft bearing 295, range 60 miles. The fighters would confirm receipt and adjust their positions accordingly. The plot would be updated as a result. The interception would unfold, and the Japanese forces would fly directly into a meticulously set trap without ever realizing it was there. The issue wasn't that Japanese pilots lacked knowledge of what to do, they were well aware. Their naval aviation strategy emphasized attacking from high altitudes with speed and coordinating their strikes effectively. This doctrine had proven effective for 2 years, from Coral Sea through Midway and Santa Cruz. However, the doctrine assumed both sides operated under conditions of limited visibility. It also presumed undetected approaches until visual range was achieved, and that enemy combat air patrols would be randomly positioned. These assumptions held true in 1942, when Japanese formations approached American carriers and battled through combat air patrols that were largely based on guesswork. At times, the Japanese managed to breach defenses, but there were also instances when they failed. By June 1944, these scenarios were outdated. The Americans were no longer making guesses. Instead, they were actively monitoring and computing enemy movements, ensuring precise interceptions that left Japanese pilots perplexed about their predicaments. On June 19, Vice Admiral Hisaburo Ozawa dispatched 4 large attacks from his mobile fleet against Task Force 58. His forces included 9 aircraft carriers equipped with 430 carrier-based planes. He anticipated assistance from around 300 land-based aircraft stationed at Guam, Rota, and Tinian. Ozawa believed he held a numerical edge and that his planes had greater range. 200 miles versus the American carrier's operational radius of only 150 miles. He presumed he could strike the Americans, refuel and rearm on Guam, and then return to his fleet for another assault, thereby overwhelming their defenses with multi-directional attacks. Unbeknownst to Ozawa, American submarines had already located his fleet. USS Flying Fish spotted carriers on June 15th, while USS Seahorse identified battleships the same day. USS Kavala tracked the fleet throughout June 17th and 18th. Additionally, U.S. intelligence had cracked Japanese operational codes by then. Admiral Raymond Spruance, who led the Fifth Fleet, was aware that Ozawa's forces were approaching. Meanwhile, Admiral Mark Mitcher, in command of Task Force 58 from the Lexington, initiated a well-coordinated defensive plan aimed at annihilating Japanese naval aviation within a single day. At 0700 hours on June 19th, American radar operators spotted Japanese aircraft gathering over Guam. By 0800 hours, a sizable formation was detected roughly 80 miles southwest of the task force. Around 1000 hours, radar screens across the fleet registered the arrival of the first major raid. The raid consisted of 69 aircraft approximately 150 miles away, heading westward from an undetermined altitude but likely at high elevation, closing in at a speed of 180 knots. This formation was designated as Raid 1 by fighter directors. The task force's fighter director on the Lexington coordinated with various task group fighter directors across the fleet to mount an effective defense. Multiple carriers prepared to launch every available fighter. The system that had been honed over 2 years through combat experience and rigorous training was about to undergo its most significant test. In the Combat Information Center, CIC of the Lexington, the fighter direction officer observed the plot unfolding on a transparent vertical board 130 miles out, where Japanese formations were depicted by grease pencil marks. As the Japanese formation continued moving eastward, Hellcats that were already airborne on routine combat air patrol started intercepting them. Additional fighters were being launched from carriers throughout the task force to engage the enemy at an altitude of 70 miles west and at 18,000 feet to disrupt their attack dives before they could commence. The scattered Hellcats covered a vast area of 40 miles across the ocean at various altitudes. Radio communications directed them accordingly. Standby 25 and turn right heading 280 and climb to Angels 18. Standby on 频道18，保持航向通缉路准备频道34 Vortran 265，雷达图显示地狱猫战斗机开始汇合，距离60英里。而日方编队持续逼近，距离分别为190和80海里，和拦截行动正在展开，时间紧迫但可行。上午10点23分。米切尔将军命令所有航空母舰最大限度地发射战斗机，每艘航母上的每一架可用的地狱猫都升空了。超过200架战斗机在空中集结，由雷达操作员指挥和协调。更多的无线电通话不断传来。日方编队到达3英里范围时，而领先的一支地狱猫小队报告目视，发现目标敌机位于正上方超点中位置，规模庞大。战斗指挥官下达了命令，雷霆出击。地狱猫战斗机迅速俯冲而下。The leading division descended upon the Japanese formation from above and in front, taking up an ideal position. The Japanese were caught off guard as Hellcats suddenly appeared among them. Zeros attempted to counterattack, but it was too late. The Hellcats had already sliced through the formation, causing widespread disarray. Additional squadrons of Hellcats arrived precisely where fighter directors had predicted, adding pressure from various directions. This onslaught caused the Japanese formation to fragment further. Isolated aircraft made desperate attempts to reach the carriers, only to be intercepted and eliminated by pursuing Hellcats. Meanwhile, anti-aircraft fire from battleships and cruisers created a formidable barrier of explosions at 12,000 feet. Any Japanese planes that managed to breach the Hellcat screen faced this lethal curtain of flak. Few succeeded in breaking through unscathed. By 10:40, the battle was largely concluded, with 42 out of 69 Japanese aircraft destroyed and another 27 turning back or dispersing. The American carriers remained untouched by enemy fire, suffering only one Hellcat loss, which was recovered by a destroyer. At 11:07, radar detected RA-2 consisting of 109 planes approaching from the northwest at a distance of 120 miles, a larger force than RID-1. Task Force fighter directors quickly assigned intercept missions to multiple carriers, with Essex taking primary responsibility for this new threat. Lexington provided backing, and Bunker Hill dispatched more fighters. The cycle continued radar detection, target plotting, vector assignment, and intercept coordination. The Hellcats had already taken off from RID-1. They reconfigured their positions according to fresh vectors, altitude changes, heading adjustments, and new interception points. Raid 2 was advancing in a straight line without any evasive maneuvers. The Japanese formation adhered strictly to the prescribed doctrine. However, this doctrine presumed that the enemy lacked radar capabilities. The Hellcats intercepted them 60 miles away, destroying 70 Japanese aircraft before the raid could reach the American task force. The remaining planes dispersed 4 targeted the carriers, causing near misses but no direct hits. All were subsequently shot down. Thus, the second wave was obliterated with even greater efficiency than the first. At 1300 hours, a third raid emerged from the north, consisting of 47 aircraft. The same sequence of events unfolded: detection, tracking, plotting vectors, and interception. 7 Japanese planes were shot down during the initial engagement, while the remainder retreated without continuing their assault. The Japanese pilots were becoming increasingly aware that they were entering a trap that was invisible to them and beyond their capacity to counteract. However, there was no means of relaying this critical information to commanders who lacked an understanding of radar-directed fighter coordination. The fourth wave, consisting of 82 aircraft, launched between 10:00 and 11:30 a.m. This formation struggled to locate the American fleet due to navigational errors exacerbated by combat-induced stress. They eventually decided to head for Guam to refuel. The Fighter Control Center picked up their radar signals as they approached Aroti Field. Hellcats from the light carrier Kaupans were vectored in for interception over Guam, with additional support from 7 Hellcats dispatched from Essex and 8 from Hornet, bringing the total number of American fighters to 27. Upon arrival at Aroti Field, where Japanese aircraft were circling to land, their fuel levels were critically low and their defenses were non-existent. The Americans capitalized on this vulnerability, launching a devastating attack that resulted in the destruction of 30 Japanese planes over the airfield. Of those that managed to land, 19 sustained severe damage from strafing runs. None of the aircraft from this raid remained serviceable. By 4:00 p.m., the battle had concluded. On June 19th, Japanese losses surpassed 346 carrier aircraft destroyed, while American losses amounted to just 30 planes. This stark statistical imbalance was unprecedented in naval warfare history. The defeat inflicted upon Japan's naval aviation forces was so severe that it could not be overcome. The once feared fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor and dominated the Pacific for 2 years was now effectively crippled. This outcome did not stem from superior American pilot training or aircraft quality, although both were indeed factors. Instead, it was due to a sophisticated system developed by the Americans that integrated radar detection with coordinated communication and precise fighter direction. This seamless network proved impenetrable to Japanese pilots and beyond their comprehension. While statistics highlighted the disparity in losses, they failed to capture the true nature of what transpired. The Japanese aircrews had taken off that morning expecting to face an adversary who fought much like them, relying on visual sightings and individual initiative. What awaited them was entirely different, a meticulously orchestrated defense system capable of detecting their approach from 150 miles away, calculating their exact trajectory with precision, positioning interceptors accurately, and engaging in well-coordinated battles that left no room for individual skill to prevail. It wasn't a fair fight, it was a methodical dismantling. The Japanese pilots never saw the Combat Information Center, where radar operators monitored green blips on circular screens, plotters marked transparent boards with grease pencils, or fighter directors issued precise directions via radio microphones to Hellcat pilots. All they witnessed were perfectly positioned Hellcats appearing at every critical juncture, regardless of how the Americans were approached or how their tactics evolved. They consistently maintained a state of readiness and anticipation. This observation by Japanese pilots was relayed to their superiors. The Americans seemingly possessed advanced radar capabilities and had likely deciphered Japanese codes. Some also speculated that spies aboard the carriers provided them with crucial intelligence. These suspicions held some truth. The American forces indeed utilized superior radar technology, and they had successfully cracked the Japanese code system. However, these were not the critical elements contributing to their effectiveness. The real advantage lay in the seamless integration of various technologies and strategies into a cohesive operational framework. Americans combined detection equipment, communication networks, navigation methods, and fighter direction doctrines into an interconnected system that acted as one unified weapon. Despite having similar technological components, such as radar with a range of 50 miles and a bearing error of 5 degrees, radio communications, skillful pilots, and seasoned commanders, the Japanese failed to achieve comparable integration. Their carriers operated independently, each managing its own radar data and fighter direction without coordination from a central authority. Consequently, there was no unified situational awareness or coherent strategy among them. Fighter direction in the Japanese fleet remained fragmented and based on individual judgment rather than a systematic approach. When Japanese engineers realized what the Americans had constructed, it was already too late to react effectively. The industrial infrastructure necessary for creating an equivalent system was non-existent. Additionally, the skilled personnel required to operate such a system were no longer available due to casualties. Time constraints also hindered any potential response efforts. Japan was clearly losing the war at this point. The Combat Information Center, a CIC concept, was developed through extensive collaboration within the United States Navy. Following the Battle of Midway, which highlighted significant deficiencies in carrier defense, a range of officers and technical specialists worked tirelessly to address these issues. Radar experts enhanced detection capabilities, communications specialists improved radio protocols, tactical advisors crafted fighter direction doctrines, and training officials devised uniform operating procedures. Numerous contributors, each tackling different aspects of the problem, came together to create this system. No single individual can claim credit for inventing the CIC. It was developed through a thorough analysis of combat failures and systematic implementation of solutions. Lieutenant Commander John Montserrat played a pivotal role early on as one of the first fighter direction officers trained in the new system. He served aboard the light carrier Langley during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. On June 19th, Montserrat coordinated fighter intercepts against Japanese attacks from within the Langley's CIC. His observations and experiences that day provided valuable insights into how the system performed under combat conditions. Post-war, he authored technical papers and a memoir detailing the evolution of radar-directed fighter control. In his 1985 book titled Angel on the Yardarm, Montserrat offered detailed narratives of CIC operations during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In his writings, Montserrat emphasized that the system's success hinged on the coordinated efforts of radar operators, plotters, and fighter directors who worked with meticulous precision. While individual competence played a role, it was the overall framework that truly brought out their effectiveness. The fighter directors who vetoed intercept missions on June 19th never garnered any individual accolades. No medals, commendations, or mentions in official documents were bestowed upon them. Although the citation for Task Force 58 highlighted radar-directed fighter interception as a critical element of victory, it credited the system rather than naming specific individuals. The Navy preferred to maintain this capability under wraps because if the Japanese had comprehended how combat information centers CI functioned, they might have devised countermeasures. Thus, these details remained classified until the war's conclusion. Fighter directors continued their work without public acknowledgement, training new operators and refining procedures for better coordination. The conflict persisted for another 14 months, with every carrier battle employing this system. Operations in the Philippines, Iwima, Okinawa, and beyond saw American radar identifying Japanese formations, combat information centers plotting them accurately, and fighter directors ordering intercepts to neutralize threats. This pattern was consistent across all battles. Detected aircraft were destroyed, and American carriers remained secure. The Americans held a clear advantage throughout these engagements, as the Japanese never managed to develop an equivalent integrated system. They possessed advanced technology and skilled engineers. They also had extensive combat experience that ought to have highlighted issues. However, organizational culture and institutional inertia hindered necessary adjustments. Japanese military doctrine stressed individual initiative and a warrior spirit of self-reliance. The concept of centralized coordination clashed with these cultural values. Even when Japanese officers acknowledged the Americans' strategic advantages, they could not replicate such systems due to the lack of an infrastructure that supported them. By the time some commanders grasped the required changes, Japan's carrier fleet had been decimated, and its industrial capacity for building new technology was severely damaged. The Battle of the Philippine Sea unequivocally demonstrated that modern warfare had entered a new phase. Technology alone did not guarantee success. Factors such as radar in Britain, superior radio communication in Germany, skilled pilots and combat experience among the Japanese played roles, but were insufficient on their own. What truly mattered was integration, the ability to synthesize various technologies and methods into an effective system. Training personnel systematically rather than relying solely on individual brilliance was crucial. Additionally, adhering to procedures under pressure instead of improvising was essential for institutional success. These elements, more so than any single weapon or tactic, dictated the outcome. Post-war, the Combat Information Center concept became standard across all American warships. Procedures developed between 1942 and 1944 evolved into sophisticated naval air defense networks. In the 1970s and 1980s, when the Navy developed the Aegis combat system, it was built upon principles established during World War II: radar detection, computer plotting, coordinated weapon assignment, and systematic engagement. Technological advancements were significant. Computers replaced grace pencils, digital displays supplanted transparent boards, yet the core concept stayed consistent. The goal was to integrate detection, coordination, and execution into a cohesive system. A 1958 technical paper on naval air defense history emphasized that the Combat Information Center's success demonstrated the necessity of integrating detection, communication, and coordination in modern warfare. While individual prowess remained crucial, brave pilots, skilled radar operators, and seasoned commanders all contributed to victory. The effectiveness of these individuals alone was insufficient without a robust system to position them strategically. The side with superior information and better coordination would always outmatch the one with merely excellent individual fighters operating independently. This principle was evident during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In the first raid, 69 Japanese aircraft were sent, 42 were destroyed. During the second wave, 109 Japanese planes attacked, 70 met their demise. The sheer mathematics of this engagement highlighted the decisive nature of the battle. The Japanese pilots and crew members were undoubtedly courageous, skilled, and experienced, but they faced a system that they could neither perceive nor counteract. Consequently, they suffered heavy losses. A photograph documenting this encounter is preserved in the archives at the Naval History and Heritage Command. This photograph was taken inside a carrier's Combat Information Center during operations near Saipan in June 1944. It features several officers gathered around a large transparent plotting board, with grace pencil markings evident on the glass surface. In the background, radar scopes emit a faint glow. The officers are deeply focused on examining the plot laid out before them. The image lacks any identification of individuals, but includes details about the location and time USS Carrier, Combat Information Center, June 1944. These unnamed personnel worked alongside other anonymous radar operators and plotters to effectively neutralize Japanese naval aviation in a single day. Their success did not stem from isolated acts of heroism or last-minute bravery, but rather through methodical coordination, well-practiced procedures, and the seamless integration of technology with military doctrine, a combination that surpassed the capabilities of their adversaries. Innovation during wartime occurs not because of singularly brilliant individuals working in isolation, but due to institutions that recognize challenges, devise solutions, train personnel, and refine methods over time. The advancements were the result of collective effort: engineers meticulously designing improved radars, communications experts crafting dependable radio protocols, tactical analysts studying combat data and updating doctrine accordingly, educators establishing schools to teach innovative techniques, and maintenance teams ensuring equipment functioned efficiently under demanding conditions. Logistics personnel made sure that replacement components arrived at the front lines. On June 19, 1944, these coordinated efforts culminated in the Combat Information Centers of Task Force 58, demonstrating that a well-organized approach could overcome individual prowess, regardless of how courageous or seasoned the fighters might be. The Japanese realized this too late. Vice Admiral Ozawa managed to survive the conflict and went on to command whatever remnants of the Japanese carrier fleet remained throughout 1944. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October, he employed his remaining carriers as bait to draw American forces away from invasion sites. These ships were nearly empty shells with minimal aircraft and inexperienced pilots. The Americans swiftly dispatched them. Once again, Ozawa emerged unscathed. Post-war interrogations by American officials questioned him about the Battle of the Philippine Sea. When asked what had gone wrong and why Japanese naval aviation had completely collapsed, Ozawa acknowledged that American planes were superior and their pilots better trained. While this was as accurate, it overlooked a critical aspect: the Americans possessed an effective system. Despite his extensive experience and tactical acumen, Ozawa never grasped how to combat systematic coordination. His pilots flew valiantly and his strategy adhered to Japanese doctrine. However, tactics designed for individual combat in 1941 were ineffective against integrated warfare systems in 1944. The chasm was insurmountable. On June 19th, Japanese pilots ventured into this void. Under the assumption they were undertaking routine combat missions, attack American forces, sink carriers, return safely to base, with some fatalities anticipated, though most would likely survive based on standard ratios. However, in reality, from the first assault alone, 42 perished, while only 27 managed to escape. None succeeded in reaching and striking at the American carriers. The Japanese demonstrated immense bravery, honed skills, and rigorous training. Yet they lacked a technological framework capable of rivaling American radar-directed fighter control systems. Warrant Officer Sakio Kamatsu had already given his life earlier that day by sacrificing himself to prevent a torpedo from hitting the Taiho. His act epitomized the pinnacle of Japanese warrior ethos. Nevertheless, no amount of individual heroism could compensate for systemic technological inferiority. On June 19, 1944, this deficiency resulted in Japan losing 346 aircraft and ultimately the war in the Pacific. This underscores a critical lesson of modern warfare: alone is insufficient if engaged in an outdated conflict. Training proves futile when doctrine becomes obsolete. Skill goes unutilized when the adversary can anticipate and counter every move due to superior surveillance capabilities. The Japanese possessed both valor and adeptness, but these attributes were ultimately overshadowed by their technological shortcomings. They possessed considerable skill, but lacked a system that could rival American radar-directed fighter control. On June 19, 1944, this shortcoming led to the loss of 346 aircraft and effectively ended the war in the Pacific. That morning, the submarine war inflicted severe damage on Ozawa's fleet. At 08:16, USS Albacore launched a salvo of 6 torpedoes at the carrier Taiho. Sakio Kamatsu, who had just taken off, witnessed the torpedo wakes and deliberately crashed his aircraft into one torpedo's path to destroy it, sacrificing his life in the process. 4 other torpedoes missed their mark, but the 6th struck Taiho on the starboard side. Initial damage appeared minimal, but fuel vapor began leaking from ruptured tanks onto the hangar deck. A damage control officer ordered the ventilation system to maximum capacity to clear the fumes, a decision that proved fatal. Instead of expelling the vapors overboard, the system circulated them throughout the ship. At 15:22:28, a spark ignited the vapor, causing Taiho to explode from within. Secondary explosions followed, transforming the carrier into an inferno in mere minutes. She sank at 16:48 with 160-50 crew members aboard. Over 1,500 men perished. At 11:11, USS Cavallo fired torpedoes at the carrier Shokaku. 3 hit the veteran ship, which had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor. She had seen action in the Coral Sea, Santa Cruz, and a dozen other fierce engagements. She had weathered bomb blasts and torpedo strikes before, but this time the destruction was overwhelming. Fires fueled by aviation fuel quickly spread out of control. Damage control efforts were futile. At 20:10, the captain gave the order to abandon ship. By 15:04, Shukaku exploded and sank beneath the ocean surface. 887 crew members perished. The carrier that had instilled fear in the Pacific for 2 years disappeared into the depths along with her aircraft, which were destroyed by American fighters during the battle. The loss of not just 1 but 2 fleet carriers further compounded the disaster, alongside the destruction of 346 aircraft. Yet the human toll was even more staggering. Japan began the war with around 3,500 highly skilled carrier pilots, yet by June 1944, fewer than 1,000 remained seasoned and capable. The training program could not keep pace with the mounting losses due to fuel shortages and restricted flight practice. New recruits underwent just 3 months of instruction compared to the 2 years pre-war pilots trained for. This disparity in quality was immense, leaving inexperienced Japanese pilots vulnerable to being shot down by their more experienced American counterparts. The Battle of the Philippine Sea decimated what little remained of Japan's seasoned pilot corps. By June 19th, Japanese carriers were barely able to man their surviving aircraft. Quantity and quality had both plummeted dramatically. Despite these devastating losses, the American victory came at a relatively minor cost, just 30 aircraft lost on that day, with most pilots rescued through recovery operations. Carriers within Task Force 58 emerged unscathed from the engagement. The escorting battleships and cruisers sustained no damage either. Their anti-aircraft defenses performed flawlessly throughout the operation. An advanced American weapon known as proximity-fused shells played a critical role by detonating near enemy aircraft without requiring direct hits. Japanese pilots encountered walls of exploding shells that seemed to track their movements through the sky. The synergy between radar, directed interceptors, and these sophisticated anti-aircraft systems proved impenetrable for the Japanese attackers. On June 20th, American forces shifted to an offensive stance. Admiral Mitchell dispatched strike groups targeting the retreating Japanese fleet. Pilots located Ozawa's carriers late in the afternoon, pushing their aircraft to the limits of the Hellcat's operational range. With fuel reserves critically low and darkness setting in, the returning pilots faced a daunting challenge. Despite these risks, Mitchell authorized the attack. American aircraft engaged the Japanese fleet as dusk fell, inflicting significant damage on several carriers and sinking the supply ship Jinomaru. However, the late timing of the assault forced many pilots to make their return journey under cover of night with minimal fuel reserves. Several ran out of fuel over open water and were forced to ditch in the sea, while others attempted perilous nighttime landings aboard carriers. The losses sustained that evening surpassed those inflicted by Japanese forces on June 19th. Mitchell's decision to illuminate every vessel in Task Force 58 with lights, navigation aids, searchlights and signal lamps despite the risk of attracting enemy submarines has been widely debated. This bold move aimed at guiding pilots safely back to their carriers, even though it compromised the blackout discipline essential for naval security. The majority of pilots managed to locate carriers and make safe landings. Rescue efforts persisted throughout the night, with American destroyer crews rescuing numerous aviators from the sea. By the end of June 20th, it was reported that 20 American aircraft had been lost in combat. An additional 80 planes were accounted for due to fuel exhaustion or landing mishaps. However, most of the aircrew survived. The effectiveness and systematic nature of American combat search and rescue operations matched those of their air defense systems. The Battle of the Philippine Sea effectively dashed Japanese aspirations of defeating the American naval advance through carrier-based aviation. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa had conceived Operation A-Gyo months earlier as a decisive engagement aimed at halting U.S. progress in the Pacific. He anticipated that by concentrating Japan's remaining carrier forces, sufficient damage could be inflicted to compel negotiations for peace. His strategy was predicated on an approximate parity in aircraft numbers and pilot quality, both of which were inaccurate assessments. In reality, American carriers outnumbered their Japanese counterparts, while U.S. pilots benefited from significantly superior training. Moreover, the integration of advanced technology into standardized procedures provided the United States with a decisive advantage. Within just one day, Admiral Ozawa's ambitious plan had crumbled entirely. The political ramifications in Japan were swift. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo resigned on July 18th, less than a month after the disastrous defeat at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. His government's pledge of victory proved unfounded as the battle demonstrated otherwise. Tojo's resignation did not alter Japan's strategic predicament, but instead conveyed to knowledgeable observers that Japanese leadership recognized the futility of continuing the war. The subsequent question was how long Japan would persevere and what level of destruction would be endured before surrender became inevitable. The Battle of the Philippine Sea affirmed that the United States island-hopping strategy would be successful. American troops secured Saipan by July 9th, overcoming intense Japanese resistance. Tinian was captured on August 1st, followed by Guam's recapture on August 10th. The Marianas offered crucial bases for B-29 Superfortress bombers, enabling strikes against Japan from Saipan and Tinian. Strategic bombing of the home islands in November 1944, made feasible by American control over the Marianas following the carrier battle that dismantled Japanese naval aviation on June 19th. The technological insights gained during the Philippine Sea engagement had a lasting impact on naval warfare for decades to come. Post-World War II. Every navy acknowledged the critical role of radar-directed fighter control in carrier operations. The Soviet Union meticulously analyzed American Combat Information Center at CIC methods and created similar systems. Meanwhile, the British Royal Navy, which pioneered some early radar techniques before the Americans, further refined its coordination procedures. NATO adopted standardized air defense protocols based on wartime American practices. Today's modern carrier battle groups utilize digital systems capable of processing vast amounts of data at unprecedented speeds compared to 1944 technology. However, the core principles remain unchanged: detect threats as far away as possible, accurately plot their positions, vector interceptors for engagement before they reach defended ships, and coordinate all actions through centralized direction. The Combat Information Center of 1944 evolved into a Combat Direction Center but ultimately reverted to being known again as a Combat Information Center. As terminology progressed, the functions remained unchanged. Radar systems underwent significant evolution over time. The SK-2 radar during the Battle of the Philippine Sea operated at a frequency of 2T9 Gs and had output power of 100 kW. Its maximum range was 150 miles, which required optimal conditions for full effectiveness. Despite being impressive for its era in 1944, it would be considered rudimentary by today's standards. Post-war advancements led to the creation of radar systems that operated at higher frequencies and featured dramatically increased power and sensitivity levels. Digital signal processing eventually replaced traditional analog displays. Computer integration enabled automatic tracking of numerous targets simultaneously. The E-2 Hawker airborne early warning aircraft expanded detection ranges beyond 300 miles. The Aegis system could track and engage multiple threats concurrently with minimal human input. However, all these advancements were built upon the foundational work done by engineers in 1944, who successfully integrated radar technology with fighter direction systems. Even as technological capabilities improved, the role of the human operator remained indispensable. In 1944, radar operators monitored circular screens and verbally reported contacts. Today's systems utilize high-resolution color displays supported by computer assistants. Yet operators still need to interpret data, identify patterns, and make decisions under pressure. Similarly, fighter directors in 1944 issued navigation instructions through voice radio communications. Modern controllers rely on data links and digital communication methods, but must still coordinate multiple aircraft, prioritize threats, and manage complex engagements in real-time scenarios. While technology aids human decision-making processes, it does not eliminate the necessity for skilled personnel. This principle, learned from experiences during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, remains relevant today. The battle highlighted the significance of rigorous training and established doctrines. American triumph was largely due to superior preparation rather than just better equipment. Fighter directors underwent months of intensive training before entering combat zones. They honed their skills alongside radar operators and plotters, ensuring seamless cooperation under stressful conditions. Standardized procedures were implemented across all combat information centers, CICs, allowing fighter directors to adapt effortlessly when switching between different ships. Hellcat pilots were drilled extensively to follow precise vector instructions, confident that controllers would guide them accurately. This mutual trust was cultivated through numerous training exercises. As combat unfolded, every team member knew their specific role, and the entire system operated seamlessly because extensive practice had turned coordination into a second nature for hundreds of participants. In contrast, Japanese forces failed to reach this level of systematic readiness. While individual pilots underwent intensive flight skill training, tactical coordination primarily focused on small units involving 2 or 3 aircraft. Large-scale integration between carriers, ships, and multiple fighter groups never materialized systematically. Each vessel operated independently, with commanders making decisions based solely on their own assessments. When American radar-directed fighter control created a cohesive defense network, Japanese forces struggled to respond effectively due to the lack of an institutional framework for such coordinated actions. This lesson extends beyond naval warfare into modern military operations in various domains. Advanced weaponry alone offers limited advantages if not integrated into well-coordinated strategies that combine technology, training, and doctrine into unified systems. No single soldier, regardless of skill, can rival the efficiency of a well-trained unit operating with systematic procedures. The same principles that made combat information centers effective in 1944 continue to apply to modern air operations, ground combat, cyber warfare, and space missions today. Clear battlefield awareness, effective coordination among forces, and methodical execution are essential for success. These fundamentals transcend specific technologies and remain crucial for military triumph. The memorial at Sapan commemorates the Marines and soldiers who fought ashore in June and July 1944. Over 29,000 American casualties were recorded, including nearly 3,500 killed. The ground combat was extremely fierce, with every cave, ridge, and building contested through infantry assaults against staunch resistance. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is less well known compared to the land fighting, but played a critical role in securing victory on shore. If Japanese carrier aircraft had reached the invasion beaches, casualties would have been much higher for the assault forces. Similarly, an attack on supply ships could have jeopardized the entire operation. The combat information centers that annihilated Japanese naval aviation in one day allowed American ground troops to secure Saipan with uninterrupted support from naval and air forces. The technological triumph at sea paved the way for the arduous victory on land. Many of those who operated these combat information centers received only unit citations without individual recognition or publicity. Most completed their tours, left the Navy after the war, and returned to civilian life without detailing their contributions. Radar operators became electricians, plotters turned into draftsmen, fighter directors found new careers as air traffic controllers or chose entirely different paths. They saw themselves merely fulfilling their duties in a groundbreaking endeavor. In contrast, more dramatic aspects of World War II, such as the exploits of fighter pilots and submarine crews and marine amphibious assaults, garnered significant attention and acclaim. Those individuals working behind closed doors, monitoring radar screens and updating plotting boards, stayed largely unknown, yet their role in securing victory was just as crucial as that of combat pilots. They demonstrated the need for modern warfare to embrace new types of warriors. One who possessed not only bravery but also technical expertise capable of handling sophisticated machinery under pressure. In 1944, the concept of a warrior underwent a transformation. This shift has persisted ever since. The Navy developed rigorous training programs for personnel working in combat information centers. These courses were conducted at locations such as San Diego, Pearl Harbor, and Norfolk, focusing on radar operations, plotting methods, and fighter direction. The curriculum spanned 3 months, during which trainees learned to identify various aircraft signatures on radar screens. They practiced estimating altitude from radar shadows and distinguishing genuine targets from weather anomalies and false echoes. Plotters honed their ability to convert bearing and range data into precise positions on vertical boards while maintaining speed and accuracy under tight deadlines. Fighter direction officers, all commissioned officers, were taught to compute interception geometry, manage multiple fighter units simultaneously, and maintain situational awareness during chaotic combat scenarios. The training was highly challenging, with washout rates surpassing 30%. Nevertheless, graduates emerged equipped with skills that did not exist prior to the war. This period marked the birth of a brand new naval specialty in response to technological advancements and operational requirements. The equipment itself showcased significant engineering accomplishments for its time. The SK-2 radar featured a 20-foot rotating antenna situated atop the carrier's superstructure. It operated at a frequency of 290 MHz by emitting radio pulses. When these pulses encountered aircraft, they generated bright spots on circular cathode ray tube screens. Under optimal conditions, bomber-sized targets could be detected from distances as close as 100 meters, while fighter-sized aircraft appeared between 60 and 80 miles away. Detection range fluctuated based on atmospheric conditions, antenna height, target altitude, and operator proficiency. Maintaining the system was an ongoing challenge due to frequent vacuum tube failures and salt spray corrosion that degraded electrical connections. High tropical temperatures further stressed electronic components. Radar technicians worked tirelessly to ensure continuous operation, with each major radar installation typically requiring 2 or 3 such specialists. These individuals became indispensable members of the crew. A carrier without functioning radar was virtually defenseless compared to one equipped with fully operational systems. The maintenance infrastructure for these technical setups proved just as crucial as the equipment itself. Combat information centers utilized plotting boards that exemplified simplicity and effectiveness. Constructed from large sheets of translucent Hercium glass, these boards allowed operators on both sides to see markings clearly while enduring harsh shipboard conditions. Different colored grace pencils were used, red for enemy aircraft, blue for friendly fighters, and green for unidentified contacts, to denote various types of targets. Marks could be swiftly erased when raid activities ceased and new operations commenced. Behind the plotting board, status boards displayed critical information about airborne fighter divisions, their fuel levels, and assigned patrol areas. This straightforward yet efficient system played a vital role in coordinating defensive efforts during combat scenarios. The CIC allowed anyone on board to grasp the entire system effortlessly. There were no complex computer screens or electronic intricacies. Instead, it featured glass boards, grease pencils, and knowledgeable personnel skilled in their use. This straightforward setup was a major advantage. The equipment could be easily maintained and repaired by the ship's crew using readily available materials. It did not require specialized factory technicians for repairs. The technology aligned perfectly with the Navy's ability to sustain operations far from industrial support bases. The voice radio systems operated on very high-frequency channels ranging between 200 and 300 MHz. Each carrier employed several distinct radio frequencies to avoid interference among different fighter squadrons. In the CIC, radio operators kept constant contact with all airborne fighters. They relayed guidance vectors from fighter directors to pilots, transmitted fuel status updates, and coordinated landing sequences upon return. Clear communication was paramount. To reduce confusion, the Navy established standardized radio procedures, including standard phrases, formats for position reports, and consistent acknowledgements. Pilots and controllers used a common language both literally and procedurally. This uniformity in terminology greatly enhanced efficiency. For example, when a controller stated Angels 18, every pilot understood it to mean an altitude of 18,000 feet. Similarly, if a pilot requested Buster, the controller knew they wanted maximum speed. The shared vocabulary eradicated any potential misunderstandings. The seamless integration of radar, plotting charts, and radio communications produced a combined capability surpassing that of individual components. Information moved smoothly from radar operators to plotters, then to fighter directors, and finally to pilots. Efforts were made to reduce delays and minimize errors through rigorous cross-checking and standardized protocols. The system functioned like a well-oiled machine with human elements, each component executing specific tasks in harmony with others. This level of systematic integration was uncommon for the year 1944, when most military units relied on independent decision-making by individual commanders based on localized intelligence. The Combat Information Center introduced a new paradigm, centralized data collection and coordinated execution. Its effectiveness led to its adoption beyond naval aviation, including ground-controlled intercept radar stations and Army Air Force bomber formations. This concept permeated various branches of the military due to its proven success. Statistics clearly demonstrate the performance benefits this system provided. During the Battle of Midway in 1942, American carriers lacked an effective combat information center when engaging Japanese forces. As a result, their fighters were launched against incoming attacks, but failed to achieve optimal interception angles, allowing many Japanese bombers to reach and damage American carriers, including sinking the USS Yorktown. Despite significant losses, Japanese pilots managed to deliver successful strikes. In contrast, at the Battle of Philippine Sea in 1944, fully developed Combat Information Center procedures enabled American carriers to intercept and destroy incoming Japanese air raids before they could approach within bombing range. Not a single Japanese bomb struck American carrier decks. The primary advantage did not lie in aircraft or pilot proficiency, but rather in the superior coordination facilitated by the advanced command systems. The Hellcat had an edge over the Zero, though not overwhelmingly so. In 1944, American pilots were better trained than their Japanese counterparts, but in 1942, American and Japanese pilots had similar levels of training, which still left Americans struggling against well-coordinated Japanese attacks. The key advantage lay with the Combat Information Center at CIC and radar-directed fighter control. This system enabled American fighters to be positioned perfectly for every interception, regardless of whether the Japanese formations approached from various angles or employed different tactics. Superior intelligence and coordination neutralized any individual aircraft performance advantages or pilot skills. The cost-effectiveness of the CIC was notable. While advanced by 1944 standards, it remained relatively inexpensive compared to ships and aircraft. A complete radar setup could be acquired for around 100 Zaozunzen, and training a full CIC crew required minimal equipment and time from instructors and students. The return on investment was impressive. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, American forces lost 30 planes while destroying 346 Japanese aircraft, achieving an 11-1 kill ratio. Without the assistance of the CIC system and employing methods similar to those used in 1942, this ratio likely would have been closer or possibly more favorable to the Japanese. The CIC transformed a slight numerical advantage into overwhelming superiority. No other weapon system provided such a high return on investment. This had a profound psychological impact on Japanese pilots who survived the battle. They returned to their carriers demoralized, reporting that American defenses were impervious and no tactics could penetrate them. Low approach was detected, and coordinated attacks from various directions were intercepted simultaneously. The pessimism evident in Japanese pilot diaries after June 1944 indicated their awareness of facing an enemy they could not effectively combat. Some pilots concluded that survival was improbable and turned to kamikaze tactics as a means to achieve some form of victory through death. Suicide missions initiated in October 1944 were partly a reaction to the conventional attack failures during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. If pilots couldn't survive long enough to bomb carriers, they would crash their planes into them instead. The emergence of kamikaze attacks had multiple causes, but the technological inferiority exposed at the Battle of the Philippine Sea played a significant role. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is recognized as one of history's most lopsided victories. The immediate outcome, with 346 Japanese aircraft destroyed compared to just 30 American losses, speaks for itself. However, the long-term implications were equally profound. Japanese naval aviation never recovered from this defeat. This victory opened the door for a strategic bombing campaign against Japan and allowed an unopposed island-hopping advance. The concept of systematic coordination through technological integration was also validated by these events. The lessons learned during the Battle of the Philippine Sea have influenced not only naval warfare but military operations in all domains over the past 80 years. Modern warfare since 1944 has been as much about systems and integration as it is about weaponry itself. The side with superior systems typically prevails, regardless of individual equipment quality, a principle clearly demonstrated on June 19, 1944, which remains a cornerstone in contemporary military thinking. If you found this account compelling, please take a moment to like the video. Your support helps us share more untold stories from World War II. Subscribe to stay informed about these forgotten histories. Every single person counts and deserves recognition. We would be delighted to hear from you. Feel free to share in the comments section where you are tuning in from. Our community is worldwide, connecting history buffs and veterans alike. You are an integral part of this unique group. Thank you for your involvement and for preserving these stories.